Thank you so much for coming. So my name is Patrick Baert. I teach here. I'm also the convener of the Sociology seminar, which takes place every fortnight. Same time, same place. And we absolutely delighted to have Eduardo Bonilla-Silva from Duke University, who is currently the Pitt visiting professor, Pitt professor here at the University of Cambridge. Pitt professorship was introduced here in the 1940s to invite prominent academics based in the US to inform us about sociology and history, especially with an American focus. And we have had, several historians, but also sociologists, including, of course, Eduardo now, in that particular context. I don't need to introduce very much about Eduardo's work, because you're obviously familiar with a lot of the themes of his work and his major books. I will leave it now to Eduardo to talk about his particular focus here on white normativity, especially in the context of American universities. I do want to say something very quickly about a recent publication in the American Behavioral Scientist, which deals with historically white colleges and universities. And that particular publication, if I'm correct, is somehow connected to what you will be discussing here. Of course, most of you have read Racism Without Racists, which is currently in its, if I'm correct, in its 6th edition.
So I want to begin by saluting the group, Decolonize Sociology, and there is a code that you may want to scan. By the way, don't stay in sociology. Decolonize the world, the UK, decolonize Puerto Rico, where I was raised. So we still have colonialism in our midst. Also, I wanted to say that this is a wonderful podium. This shows the sociological imagination at its best. What to do when you don't have all the resources available. You're creative. So good afternoon. I'm delighted to be back in the UK because it reminds me a lot about Puerto Rico, the place where I grew up. Born in the USA, can you detect my American accent from Western Pennsylvania? Come on. The weather, people, and culture are quite different, but the racial formations are similar. We deny having a systemic racial problem, even though we clearly treat immigrants of color and our own people of color as second-class citizens. All Europeans admit extreme racial moments in their history, such as the Holocaust, or to racist actors and organizations such as John Enoch Powell and the National Front. However, they do so in a way that prevents them from understanding that their racism did not begin with Hitler or with Powell, and certainly did not end after World War II or with Powell's death in 1998. Not surprisingly, an important segment of the intelligentsia, politicians, and the masses believe that talking about systemic racism is itself racist. For instance, French philosopher Pierre-André Taguieff, who I cited once, never again, has recently argued that using the term anti-racism amounts to having an anti-white stance. Of course, you have your own version of this nonsense here, and some of it in blackface. I'm going to confess that I oversold my talk with a big title, The Problem of White Normativity, How Systemic Racism Works, and the Curious Case of HWCUs. But I got you, so now you're here. So let me make clear two things from the outset. First, although my empirical case is based in the US, the arguments I will advance apply to all societies in modernity, including the UK. Second, the white normativity part in the title refers to my firm belief that racialization is not fundamentally about things that happen in hidden rooms or done by people with master plans, but of things carried out by racially habituated RWF, regular white folks, doing mundane things in the everyday life. So you're going to see a lot of my drawings because that's what I do. And here you have my rendition of a Cambridge and Duke student, as well as a picture. I type in the computer, regular whites. That's the family that came up. So, to make my case, I will use elements of my body of work over the last 25 years. So first, I will describe what I mean by systemic racism. Second, I will talk about the racial structure in the US in the post-civil rights era, which I call the new racism. Third, I will outline briefly the hegemonic racial ideology that rules in America, and I indeed think probably most of the world, which I call colorblind racism. In Latin America, we call it differently, but it's more or less the same beast. And I think, again, these arguments about new racism and colorblindness will be similar and will resonate well with your experiences in the UK. Fourth, I will spend some time describing HWCUs, historically white colleges and universities. And the name is not by chance. Those of you who do education, for example, know that there is an alternative term, PWIs. Predominantly white. I don't like it because that's a demographic term. And as I will suggest, my argument is rooted in power. Fifth, I will provide the sketch of an explanation, and I admit one in progress, for how racial domination takes place. And I will conclude by suggesting policies and politics that we need to fight the main enemy in both the US and Europe, which is not the people with the hoods, but normative racism. It dresses differently, but the effect is powerful. So, what is racism? For too long, social scientists have subscribed to the common sense, comforting definition of racism. Racism, we have argued, is the Klan, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, they can be in the US or in Germany, or in the UK, or the nasty, rotten apples. You don't know how long it took me to find the perfect color for that worm, and I'm still not satisfied. This view connected to the prejudice tradition developed by Gordon Allport, who wrote that important book, The Nature of Prejudice, in '54, I think, limits our analysis. First, as I argued in my 1997 piece in ASR, by focusing on individuals and their attitudes, this perspective misses the collective character of racism. Second, it regards racism as the original sin, missing that racism is a historical phenomenon that as such changes over time and exhibits variations and specificities in social formations. So for example, I'm from Puerto Rico, Monica is from Mexico. We have similarities, but our formations are different. And they're different from the UK or the US, yet they all share elements. But it's important to know the differences, yeah? Third, by focusing attention on overt actions, the prejudice approach neglects the covert, unconscious, and most importantly for my work, what I'm doing these days, the habituated nature of most racialized behavior. Fourth, it frames racial affairs in moralistic terms, overlooking the fundamental reason racism exists. So racism is not about good actors and bad actors. Racism is in place not because some people are again bad, immoral, or plain stupid, although some may be. That was a joke. Tough audience in Cambridge. Racial regimes are in place because the systems benefit those at the top of the racial order. Racism, as I have argued throughout my career, has a material foundation. Marx is in the room. By material, I don't mean a class-based explanation. I mean material in the sense of race stratification. Hence, a good structural theory of racism first must take the collective nature of racism seriously. Second, it must be historical. And third, it must be materialist. This, I think, is good. And I was happy with this when I published the piece in '97, but only idiots believe that their theorizations are finished products. New data, new methodology, new approaches force you to rethink things. I've been rethinking my own rethinking racism. So in recent work, I have theorized about individuals and their social subjectivity, the multiple factors that affect us as subjects. You are not just a gender subject or a class subject or a racial subject, you're also a sexual subject, etc. And all those elements of your subjectivity affect and interact with one another. And also how the structure of a society is produced and reproduced. Most structural theories of racism, including me, have made the structure into an all-powerful ghost. Something that affects everything but is hard to pin down. You have talked to structural analysts who tell you it's structural, and when you push them, by that you mean, the structure of the structure is the structure, yeah? And I'm like, you cannot define the term you're using. The mystery of how the structure, policies, and practices that we associate with systemic racism transpire in predictable patterns of ways disappears once we take seriously the fact that regular white folks are shaped by what I refer in my work as the white habitus. And I confess, when I crafted this notion, there is a longer story. I hope someone asks me at the end, because I didn't want to call it white habitus. I don't care much about the work of Bourdieu. Ooh, I said it. But I was forced. Young scholar, you have to do things. He told me, I call it lifestyle. And lifestyle in the American sociological tradition was behaviour. I'm like, oh my goodness, you cannot do that. So I told the computer, search and replace lifestyle for habitus, put a little bit of quote from Bourdieu, and then, oh, great, I love it. So the white habitus, which produces normative white socialization without knowing that you're being socialized into whiteness, literally trains whites into the habits of whiteness, cognitively, aesthetically, and even emotionally, from birth to death. So now let me turn my attention briefly to the central characteristics of the new racism. Although most analysts recognize that the end of Jim Crow in the 60s or so did not mean the end of systemic racism, we have had a tough time naming and specifying elements of the system that replace it. And I think that naming is important, yeah? That gives you a vehicle to fight politics, analysis, etc. For at least 25 years, I have argued that a new racialized regime emerged in the 70s, which I labeled the new racism. If I had to do it again, I wouldn't call it that. I would call it democratic racism or something like that. But at the time, young scholar, you need to get published, so it is what it is. Young folks, that's part of the drama. Careers are part of what we do, and you don't have time because it's like publish or perish. This new racial regime structures most, I didn't say all, most racial action in society. The main elements of the system are, first, that discrimination tends to be covert or indirect. In stores, for example, we are, and I am a subject too, so I can tell you what happens to me, we are ignored or murdered with racist politeness. May I help you? Just looking. May I help you? Still looking. May I help you? Yeah. I'm trying to steal this coat. Barber. Fancy. Can you give me some point? Are you a minute like that? I say, yes, you did, because I told you I'm looking, and you keep harassing me. And this is a white guy, how do you ask him to, Does that happen here? Nah, you are not patrol. Black folks are free to walk around Cambridge without any problem in any store. Second, avoidance of direct racial terms or racist terminology. The N-word, for instance, is not used in most public interactions, and whites are quite careful in saying anything about blacks or brown folks directly. Hence, They have developed new terminology, for example, urban clothing or streetwear to refer to clothing by black designers. These terms devalue the work of black designers by framing it as Micah Fraser Carroll stated in British Vogue in 2019 as the antithesis to luxury fashion. So it's our money, yeah? If I'm like, okay, you're doing like primitive work. So primitive, come on. There's something anthropological. Third, the racial policy agenda also tends to avoid directness, which has led to non-racial racial terms. Non-racial racial terms, such as welfare reform, inner city problems, inner city people. You know who are the inner city people? It's us. Yeah. Or in the academy, and I remember the first time I heard the term, diverse people. So I was in last time I was in one of these diversity committees. No more for me. Said, we need more diverse people. And I'm like, what do you mean? You know, people like you, people like women, people like people with disabilities, people who are not, say, meaning anyone who is not a white man. Yeah, okay. Fourth, many exclusionary as well as social control practices are invisible to whites. An example of the former is college admission tests used for admissions in the US, regarded as objective even though they predict little. Am I in the right? Yeah. And an example of the latter is police surveillance of communities of color and the brutality they employ against people of color. The last one, police brutality, etc., is not invisible now thanks to cell phone technology. Anyone in the room remembers this? Yeah. Rodney King, yeah? Now we have a different technology called the cell phone. But back in the day, this was not with a cell phone. That was with a video camera, yeah? And it was like, oh my goodness. Apparently when black people say they are being brutalized by the police, it's real. So, yep. Also, and it's important we need to be filming and continue filming this as part of the democratic project, but unfortunately the data shows it has not changed practices. So we need this for political reasons, we need this for perhaps legal reasons, but as a source for change, we need more. It looks like we need to always be in the streets. We want change. As Obama used to say, change we can believe in. I'm like, yep, not voting for you. Ooh. Lastly, all practices such as redlining, a practice that began in the 1930s, have been retooled. A covert version of redlining still happens, as documented in the recent study of 61 metro areas. The difference is that back in the day, let me show you a map. Those were the maps developed by the government in the 30s. If you are a person of color, then you are literally redlined, and you go to a bank because you are in an undesirable area, you get a worse loan product, independent of your financial characteristics, yeah? Now, they don't do that. Now it's worse. Now they redline you as an individual. So I may be a Duke professor, but I'm thinking that I got played, and that my rate was higher than I should have paid given my financial status. The cost of being, back in the day, used to be called the cost of being a Negro. I want to say something clear. I am not blind. Although the bulk of racial interactions in the Western world nowadays are of the new racing variety, more traditionally racist groups, like the Proud Boys in the US or here in the UK, the British Hand, and people like Donald Trump or Nigel Farage are still out there and may have grown in relevance in recent years. This social fact, however, is not new. All systems of domination coexist with other systems and forms of domination. They are, to borrow, I'm an old structuralist, so maybe you remember, but for the audience, to borrow from Althusser via Stuart Hall, they are articulated. And I know this cartoon makes no sense to you, but in my mind it's a brilliant thing. And I put myself in the corner because we people of color are always in corners, yeah? So you have the normative folks in the middle, the crazies on the corner, and then we people of color in corners, yeah? We're all together, but in different spaces. And our moment, as those here of a certain age recognize, resemble the 1980s under Reagan and Thatcher. So populism is not a new force in history. Racism is definitely not new, and racist violence is not new. I remember 1984 when I came to the US, and I was like, oh my goodness, getting a PhD, I need to get back to Puerto Rico, where we have a different version of racism, but this stuff will kill me. So let me now discuss the racial ideology that co-produces the new racism, which I have called colorblind racism. This ideology accounts for and ultimately justifies the racial status quo using the principles of liberalism in an abstract and decontextualized manner. When someone tells you, I'm all for equal opportunity, which is why I oppose any race-targeted program to bring students to Cambridge. That is racist. I'm like, what? So again, it's abstract use of the principle of liberalism, neglecting history, neglecting power differences, wealth differences, etc. As an ideology, it is comprised of frames. I don't have time to go over them. Styles, some of them you know. Semantic moves like, I'm not a racist, but. Do you have that here in the UK? So my best friends are, and then after that they say, however, I told you I'm a good person, but I'm going to say some nasty things about them. But I like their food. Their curries are spectacular. Having a good time, too much. And then racial stories. So let me give you an invented, I could give you an example from the book, but I said, I'm in Cambridge. Let me invent an example that fits more or less your situation. So the example is Sir Arthur Moore White III, a Cambridge student, to highlight elements of this ideology. And he said, I'm not a racist, but students with migrant background are left into our university where most are patently unqualified. I mean, we all like Abdul, and he's one of my best friends. And he's so sweet, but you know, being nice is not sufficient. My brother did not get into Cambridge because they keep admitting a bunch of they are, I guess, British, but you know what I mean. Admit the best and brightest whether they are black, white, yellow, or green. This green and purple stuff needs to go. What Indians, Pakistanis, and African people need to do is work hard, complain less, learn to speak proper English, and stop using racism as an excuse. England has some extremist people, but all in all, we are a wonderful, what is the word you like? It's not wonder. It's a lovely, say, well, you use that every day, 20 times. It's a lovely nation, which is why they all come here. So let's examine how Sir Arthur judges race matters. First, he relies heavily on abstract liberalism to making his discussion formalistic and conveniently ignoring the effects of racism, positive for him and negative for people of color. So when you do analysis on race and racism, understand that if you only focus on the bad side, you are missing the positive side, yeah? And if it's a material system, it must benefit someone. Second, he uses stylistic styles of colorblind racism, such as, I'm not a racist, and then some of my best friends are. So Abdul was his best friend, but immediately said, Abdul is good, but he's not good enough. Rhetorical incoherence. I mean, you know what I mean. I mean that, I mean. And then racial stories. For example, his story about a friend, Pakistani friend. In case I did not make this point clear, the beauty and the danger of colorblind racism is that it sustains race inequality in a smooth, seemingly non-racial way. One can even claim to be an anti-racist or even a race scholar, yet support the racial order in colorblind fashion. That I'm not going to talk. But when I retire, wow, I'll put it out. So let me now address the matter of HWCUs. Colleges and universities parade as universal, cosmopolitan, liberal institutions, but they have a history, demography, curriculum, climate, and symbols and traditions that embody, signify, and reproduce whiteness. This is why their structure and culture reflect and reproduce whiteness and the racial order that produces it. For those interested in the entire story, please read and cite. We are like little capitalists looking for citations. Citation is the coin of operation in the academy. Today I give you the skeleton of my argument. First, the history of these places matters. HWCUs were established as all-white institutions and remain so until the 1960s. Most, as you know, were established as for elites, male-dominated, like Cambridge had a religious orientation, at Princeton and Yale and Duke, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when the civil rights movement struggle came to the academy's doorsteps, whites fought very hard desegregation. This is why leaders such as Martin Luther King and lawyers for the movement such as Michael Middleton were clear that the fundamental goal was attaining equality of resources and opportunities. If racial integration happened along the way, lovely. But desegregation, they learned quickly, brought neither the resources nor racial integration. This is why I insist that what we have in places like Duke or Cambridge or Oxford or Harvard is spatial cohabitation. We're in the same space, yet integration is a substantive element, and that requires doing more than just bring a few people of color and be like, okay, vanilla ice cream, and let's put a little bit of color. This is why most people of color in these so-called integrated spaces feel alienated and minimized. Furthermore, this is also accounts for the mystery of why students of color and their allies, years after integration, continue fighting for resources and changes today, as we did back in the day when I was a graduate student in Wisconsin. Can you see me in the picture? That's right. Handsome guy. Yes, that's right. The organizational and cultural whiteness of HWCUs are the driving forces behind the isolated racist incidents that keep happening again and again and again. You don't need to be a social scientist to recognize that if incidents on race or gender happen again and again and again, there must be a structure or something explaining it. It cannot be random acts or so-called isolated incidents. At Duke, for example, the slide shows a few of these incidents over the last 10 years. Incidents which also happen at European universities, as documented at Cambridge by your own Monica Moreno-Figueroa and her colleagues. The project he's doing, I think, is unique of sort of having a place where people include their experience with microaggressions, and as she probably recognized, she's getting just the tip of the iceberg, because most people don't report. However, the deeper way in which these places embody and reproduce whiteness is through their curriculum, as well as how life activities in the college are structured. On how whiteness shapes the curriculum, I'm going to sell my products big time. See my book, White Logic and White Methods. And on life stuff, almost everything in these colleges is white-oriented, even the food we serve in events. In the US, chicken wrap sandwiches everywhere. I'm happy to report that that doesn't seem to be the case here. The traditional white group has accepted defeat. So our food nasty, so we're going to eat everything but our historical white food. The symbols Culture and traditions in these places reflect whiteness. We have white statues, some of Confederate figures, such as on the left side, Silent Sam at University of North Carolina. That statue is now down. Or other symbols, such as Venus as the symbol of beauty. The problem with having the symbol of the statue of Venus as symbol of beauty is that it represented beauty as white. And what about those of us who are of South Asian descent, or African descent, or Puerto Rican descent? Yeah? We are the best. Yeah? Where is my statue? Aren't we beautiful too? We are building after building, named after white people, making people of color feel as invisible, as Joe Fagan once said, as guests in the big house, yeah? Who cannot complain because it's like, we allow you here. You didn't allow me, you don't own this place. Now let me finally address the secret of white domination, which follows from all I have said so far. All of us are racialized actors. I am racialized too. I wish I was not. I would make more money. And they have to deal with, walking at night and be always like, oh, that person's going to attack me. She's drunk. Like Friday, 11 p.m., Cambridge changes at night. Woo. And then you guys, what is wrong with you guys? Don't want to have lights. Everything dark, like, danger, danger, danger. So we're all racialized, but racialization works differently for whites and non-whites. Whites are trained to rule, while people of color are placed in positions of subordination and systematically bombarded with messages and ideas about their so-called inferiority. The critical issue then is this: how do whites get their training into the art of racial domination? Obviously, they do not go to whiteness school where they are told, repeat after me, I'm not a racist, but, So how do whites develop similar views, cognitions, aesthetics, and even emotions? The latter subject was the subject of my 2018 presidential address. I answered this question in my lectures, asking my mostly white audiences, they love me, several questions. Questions I believe apply to you too here in the UK. Where do you live? And how were the neighborhoods in which you grew up? Who were your friends while growing up? And let's make a distinction between acquaintances and friends. I have so many whites who tell me, some of my friends, Monica is my great friend. Monica, what's her name? Yeah, Monica something, yeah. She's my really good friend. And who are your friends now? What church or other religious institution did you attend while growing up, and which church or religious organization do you attend now? Were the schools you attended integrated while growing up? Who challenges your racial views nowadays, and who did in the past? I can go on, but hope you see my point. I force regular white folks to realize that the conditions created by the white habitus shape them profoundly. And of course, if you want, say, aren't you also shaped by something like the black Puerto Rican habitus? We can talk about that too. I'm ready. No matter how nice a white individual might be, her mostly segregated racial lifestyle guides her in conscious and unconscious ways. This fact, in combination with the effects of a racist culture, leads to the creation of white bread, whiteness. Although every slice of bread is somewhat different, they all share the basics of breadness, of whiteness. Of course, per my own theorization, particularly in the last 3 years, variance in breadness can lead to ruptures and the development of white allies. This is why throughout history we have had John Browns, famous John Brown during slavery, and more recently the thousands of whites who protested after the murder of George Floyd. And for a little bit we are like, okay, this may be the moment. and then it lasted like a year and a half. And the pendulum is going now all the way in the opposite direction. Nevertheless, systems of domination, whether patriarchy, capitalism, or systemic racism, fundamentally work by creating a seductive, normative structure that swallows people into sameness, into following the path of least resistance. Systemic racism then is systemic because it incorporates most nice white people into the game. All systems of domination do that. Yeah? Angry birds are not essential for racial domination, as domination would then be contingent. What is essential is an army of silent, liberal to moderately conservative whites who are either apathetic, as Tyrone Foreman at UIC argues, or superficially concerned about racial equality. Oh my goodness, they killed that guy in Minnesota. Pass me the popcorn. This is amazing, it's just terrific. Like, well, for us, it's like, this could be my son, this could be me. And therefore, the trauma and the emotions are deeply experienced. Dr. King knew a lot, and he expressed this concern about sort of the white masses before he was murdered. This is like 6 months before, and he said, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen councilor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, that is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. After all, Klan-like whites are not the ones who follow us in stores or call 911 when they see us in their neighborhood. Neighborhoods plastered with Black Lives Matter, yeah? Unless you see one of them and then you call the police. Proud Boys are not the ones who tell us that we cannot barbecue in a park, speak Spanish in a store, or who threaten to call the police if we dare tell them they cannot have dogs without a leash in Central Park. All the cases I alluded were real ones, and all went viral. So some of you, perhaps most of you, knew about them. However, here is the thing. It's a very American expression. Here is the thing. The bulk of events expressive of white racial domination are not reported, do not go viral, and tend to be seemingly small, such as when we experience the seemingly innocuous microaggressions. Do Monica and I report when white folks tell us, hey, you're a professor at Duke, at Cambridge. Wow, this is so good for you. Your family must be so proud. I know some of you may not get this point and say, what is wrong with that? We can talk. But these seemingly small slides add up and make us people of color literally sick because we're always on a state of alert, always on a sort of fight or flight. Accordingly, racial domination works in plain sight. Whiteness is normativity, and is the secret sauce to the white supremacists too. It took me like 3 days to come with that, so mighty proud. You know, you're right, so it's like, when you find that, oh, got it. And whites do not experience or view their actions as racial acts expressive of domination. Why? Because they think they are individuals. Just Megan, Jessica, Tyler, and John. They believe they are good people doing normal stuff. Of course, Megan, Jessica, Tyler, and John are indeed different individuals. They may even be good people, but they are all, borrowing from Marx, unconscious personifications of the racial order. I'm a good person. So let me conclude by addressing the critical issue of what is to be done. And let me begin with the matter of organizational racism. That is, how systemic racism shapes organizations such as hospitals, churches, or HWCUs. If the racial problems of these places are systemic, the solution must be two. Continuing doing performative diversity, such as having unreal representations of people of color in our web pages, will not do the trick. In my alma mater, Wisconsin, they found a picture of a black person and put him in a football game, football in the American sense. Yeah. And the person is like, hey, I wasn't in that game. Oh my goodness, we're so sorry, we wanted to represent diversity. It wasn't cool, we apologize. I'm like, you idiots. So the task is fostering a new campus structure and culture. That's a big task, but got to do it. Second, these places have histories, cultures, and established practices that need revision, as they are profoundly shaped by whiteness. This will require acknowledging reality. And I do not know if what you guys did recently is publicity or a real act. I've been around and I surmise it probably will not produce much. Yeah? Duke, during the Floyd moment, was apologetic. We apologize, we had slavery in part of the historical foundation of the university, and we're going to put some money. We're going to put like $5 million. Folks, if you know the budget of Duke University, $5 million is nothing. But they said that, and I'm still waiting for the $5 million. I'll take them, you know. So you have to acknowledge and you have to work hard to undo the organizational and cultural whiteness of these places. This might include removing some statues. Oh, I was supposed to have that statue, yeah? And of course, you know that there are places like Oxford reluctant about removing Cecil Rhodes' statue. Read about Cecil Rhodes so you got a sense of why he has to go. Changing traditions and developing a more inclusive architecture. So even the architecture of the place reflects whiteness, yeah? And obviously, you have to rethink everything anew. Doesn't mean you change everything, but at least you have to go through the process of rethinking things, yeah? Third, organizations like structures are not ghosts. Racialized individuals make them what they are. Therefore, for deep change to occur, whites must change themselves. And this does not mean trying to become black, yeah? Latino, Asian, or indigenous, like that woman tried to do. It means whites must transform their white life and make it in an integrated, truly multicultural one. And that wasn't the picture it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be this one, yeah? Because by truly multicultural, I don't mean put curry in your fish and chips. That's good, but it's not multiculturalism, deep multiculturalism. So lastly, democratizing things to make them reflect the multiracial reality of the US, or for that matter, of the UK, as the slide shows, will require struggle. And this is not what social scientists want. Yeah? We want, like, I put out a paper and have a policy, and then policymakers will follow my ideas, and we're going to be happy, happy, happy. That's not the way that change happens throughout history. Deep social change has necessitated social movements. Accordingly, since racial justice will not happen without struggle, we must keep in mind the sage words of Frederick Douglass. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing with a demand. It never did, and it never will. And then I was supposed to say, gracias. And I was supposed to have something here. Monica, I want food. Okay, that's it, folks.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. It's wonderful, wonderful.
Questions, comments, digressions, criticisms?
Thank you, this is really interesting. My question was, during the book, I noticed you had a bunch of sketches between black people, people of color, indigenous people, and I was interested in whether in your work you've talked at all about the role that different
Groups.
people of color play in reproducing those white structures. Like, for instance, in England, if you're not black British, it's much
In the US, it's the same.
And to get those black positions, and so like, it looks good, like it's a black person.
Yeah, I have written about that, and I have been attacked for it, but that's my middle name. If you are in the business of making people happy, you're not doing right. I tell my students, if you write and everybody tells you, oh, this is lovely, I love it, then you have to ponder, what am I doing wrong? People should not, I'm talking mainstream white folks in the academy and the street, should not like your work. They should be feeling like, are you calling me a racist? I'm like, I'm not, but listening to you for like 2 minutes, yeah. Okay, so I argued some years ago that the US system of stratification that for the longest time was white, non-white, and that's grosso modo because in truth, the US is such a large nation state. The territory has had many variations, but grosso modo, it was whites, non-whites. So I claimed that it was slowly moving towards a Latin America-like system with 3 racial spaces. I even use the language of spaces to address the seeming fluidity of race stratification in Latin America. So I claim at the top, the usual suspects, whites and their white allies that have migrated up. Again, nothing new in terms of race formation. Race is a construction, therefore, who is white is not based on epidermis. Yeah? It's based on a political, historical process. So people who may have been something else at some period may become white. You can even be black and pass as white, as many African Americans did in the Jim Crow period. So I said, that group at the top. At the bottom, a group I call the collective black, that would include African Americans, many Latinos, not all, and some Asian American groups. And in the middle, I claimed that there was a group that I called, following the language of South Africa, honorary whites. And that group included members of Asian American communities, again, not all, but the bulk of Japanese American, Korean Americans, Indian Americans, Indian from India, etc. And I claimed that that middle space was going to be like a buffer group. And therefore, whites would be at the top, not having to do a lot of the disciplining, because the in-betweeners would do the job. So many members of those communities that are like, Eduardo, I'm so disappointed at you. I used to assign you book, never again. I'm like, wow, that's deep, never again. It sounds like Holocaust type shit, it's deep. Okay, so, and I think that that argument, which I made in 1999, and again, it has been back and forth debates with me, for me, against me, etc., is still there. And the question I have for you all is, and on Monday, we'll discuss that, yeah? Whether or not in the UK you have a system that is approximating that. I was in October in Germany, and yep, they have something like that. So what I claimed was a US peculiarity may be part of the racial world system, and then maybe the Western nations, which for the longest time were almost all white, and now have almost in every Western nation, anywhere between 10 to 20, 30% folks of color, are developing a more complicated racial regime and therefore have to sort of invent, yeah, because otherwise ruling is much, much more difficult, yeah? Why not having and incorporating elements of the other in the ruling process, Give them a little, not equality, but a better deal, and they'll help you maintain racial order. And again, I'm not saying that this is a matter of people white folks going to a meeting, okay, man, how are we going to do this, yeah? That's not how history happens. But it's interesting that in different societies, they seem to have a similar development. Questions? Yes. Oh, she was second, and then you. Yeah.
In regards to your slide on what is to be done, I'm sure you know the university, each college, they have different initiatives like BAME officers and different structures like that. I'm actually a BAME officer for my college. But, when you're met with a lot of institutional resistance and fight back from the colleges when you're trying to plan initiatives, it almost seems like your job is more like a tick box exercise rather than actually making any change. So I just wondered like what your thoughts are on how do you find the strength to like keep going when you're in those roles.
You know what BAME is? Black, Asian, and minority ethnic.
Yeah. Okay. We have a similar in the U.S. and it is hard because the institutions they want soft diversity. They want like, can we do a dinner and you bring your food from? You're from where? You're from Nigeria. You're from, oh yes, I love it. I love it. And then you cook some injera bread and you cook this and you cook. You're Puerto Rican. Wow. Arroz con habichuela, rice and beans. That's beautiful. And our job is to tell them, I ain't your servant. By the way, if you want food, you pay. I ain't going to cook for you for free. But what we need is change the structure and culture of the place, and that requires deeper policies. And that's what they don't want. So our job is the same throughout history. You ask for deep demands, clear that most likely you will not get all of them, but if you don't ask them, they'll give you the performative, get your taco, get your arroz con habichuela, get your injera bread. On the spiritual side, I'm not going to lie to you. It is hard because I went to Wisconsin 30 years after we struggled. That picture you had of me, remember handsome me? Yeah. Mustache and everything. So I went 30 years later to give a lecture like this in a huge auditorium. I was like, wow, my mother would be so proud. Unfortunately, I had to tell them, 30 years later, we struggled for a multicultural center that you named the Interim Multicultural Center. You didn't even want to give a proper name. 30 years later, what was the name? Interim Multicultural Center. And we demanded for ethnic studies courses, and what did you do? I left. That's probably students at social movements. You do the struggle for like a year, and then, okay, I need a job, so out. And then the institutional actors can be there forever, yeah? Because we love it, so. And it's better than retire, so I'm going to continue that, working until the cows come home. And in this place, the cows are near my home, so. Yeah, what's up with this cow business, man? You got to do something about it. My shoes are like I'm struggling, Anyway, so the spiritual part is really, really hard because 30 years and you are in the same business. And for you, you graduate, you do your struggle, and then your kids in 20, 30 years come back, and they're like, Mommy, we're fighting for it. I'm like, still? So the resilience of this system of domination is impressive, and I think because of what I argued today, because they don't depend on Hitler. Hitler is good, horrible expression. It's easier to fight in your face racial or gender domination, than the seductive, normative, I'm a good person, I like your food, my friend Kamal, and Eduardo and Monica. I love Monica. She had this festival. It was fantastic. And the food, my goodness, it was the best. And we danced, so it was lovely, yeah? That they like. But it's harder to fight that than to fight monster. The smiley monster wins 9 out of 10. And then you had a question.
Yeah, you mentioned before about police violence and invisible structural racism. And then we talked about mobile phones, and now there is like social media and this elements. Do you think is that really making structural change? And
It's not, as I mentioned. But I tell you first, I didn't explain why was it that it wasn't seen before. Because of segregation. If black folks are in a community and something happens and they claim, hey, the police come to our neighborhoods and beat the crap out of us, they're like, I don't believe it. What is your evidence? Well, look at my face. How do I know that was a police and not your friend? Because you guys are violent, yeah? You are known all over the world as violent people, so I don't think it was the police. The police is my friend. And the police is 2 things, yeah? It is an agent of domination for us, but it's also an agent of protection for most whites, who then call the police and they feel like, oh, the police came to my neighborhood, they were so lovely. Whereas for us, it's like danger, 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 yeah? So the cell phone technology then produced evidence that keeps, in the US, it's literally every 2 weeks another incident. But the empirical work shows that the number of incidents has not changed. It's more or less the same per year. So the question is, how do we then address that? Among other things, the problem is that we need to deal with the police apparatus as what it is, a historical organization of racial domination that came out of slavery and the slave patrols. That's the foundation of the police apparatus in the US. And then dominating blacks and poor people, mostly white. Blacks and poor people. That was the origins. In terms of race, you then have now this racialized training. A Puerto Rican anthropologist visited one of these academies, and the name of the academy, they themselves call it the Jungle Academy. It's a training for white supremacy, for masculinity, etc. Third, the selection of police officers. It's not a random selection. A lot of them are former military people who have all kinds of issues, plus they are hyper-masculine, which explains and accounts for the seeming paradox that black and brown officers are as likely to use lethal force against folks of color as white officers. Is that a race act? Yes, it is, because you have to understand the selection process, yeah? And when these people do this, they say, I'm not doing this to black people, I'm doing it to N people. They are not my people. They are the problem. So that means that we have to restructure the police, yeah? And you know that during the 2000 rebellion, people were talking about defund the police, yeah? And that collapsed. The Democratic Party, we waste time giving our vote for free without making demands to the Democrats when they are a weak, weak, weak party, even when led by Obama or now by Kamala, who is in my view, slightly weaker version of Obama, but more amenable to whites because of the complexity of her background and her marriage. It makes folks safe. And so far until this week, she refused to talk about race or gender. And now it's like, oh, I'm losing. Let me talk about black men. Come on, too late. Okay, yes.
I was wondering, like, what is the role of HBCUs then in regards to society, and how much of an influence do they have, particularly on black identity?
As you may know, HBCUs were the product of white supremacy. They were not the product of us saying we're going to create. It was slave owners who had liaisons with black women wanting their mulatto kids to have a place to go because they could not go to a white place. So let's create this place for them. That's the origin of the private HBCUs. The part that you may not be aware is that these places historically were central for the production of black doctors, black engineers, black everything. But because they have been losing steam and money and funding, they are now literally closing left and right. So the proportion of, not only the proportion of black colleges is declining, but the proportion of black students attending these places because the quote-unquote good, talented black students are recruited by Harvard, Princeton, Cambridge, Oxford. I want one like you, not like the other ones, but you're special. By the way, when someone tells you special, don't buy that nonsense because it's an insult to us. It's saying you are different, not like the other ones. I'm like, the other ones are like my father and my mother. I'm like, well, your cousins, not your father and mother, because they created you, they must be good. There was a question in this corner. Who was it? Yeah, you.
Thank you so much for the time. So in the same vein of how it is reinforced by minorities in different spaces and in between as well, like I think the issue of white negativity is becoming continuously. Do you have any strategies or any theories about how to shift the emotional labor of also being able to shift the emotional labor onto institutions as well to keep thinking about it and get it entrenched into policy conversations at the same time?
Well, arguably, institutions will not have emotions. Yeah, we humans have emotions. Yeah. The question is how to make institutional actors, the administrators, the people in power, to feel for us. or at least to feel the pain of rebellion. And honestly, I'm old-fashioned in this. I stopped believing that conversations, and it's funny for a professor to say this, but it's true. So yeah, we teach, we educate, we have conversations, and if you have cheese and wine, please invite me. I like that. I admit I have my contradictions. So good port wine and good cheese, and your college is good. Good. Mine is. Yes, there was a question there, and then in the back. Yeah. I don't know if I answered, but basically I'm saying that you have to fight and not think that by just, okay, let's have a meeting and they have a committee to study the problem. They will commit you to death. They're paid to be in committees. Whereas you're all of a sudden you graduate. Committees don't do anything. You tell them, you need a report? Check the report from 3 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. It's the same thing. Yes, you?
So I think your speech is fascinating, but I have a question towards you, about the white habitus. Have you witnessed any kind of non-white people, they adopt this kind of white habitus? And also sometimes this kind of whiteness usually rooted in the discourse of liberalism. Do you think this kind of belief in liberalism has a kind of color line?
Well, if race is a construction, then whiteness and blackness are also constructions, historical constructions. So therefore, who belongs to the group can morph and change. And the inhabitants of whiteness, I come from Puerto Rico where our whites are much darker than whites in this country. So when I went to Wisconsin, I'm like, Mónica, aquí es que hacen, this is esta es la fábrica. This is what they create, manufacture whites. Because these whites are the real whites. Our whites are not real. So therefore, the inhabitants of whiteness can morph and change. And if I am right on my argument of the Latin Americanization, they told me not to get, this is my corner, you should have put a little thing here that stabs me, so I'm okay with that. I need discipline. That's what my wife tells me all the time. You need discipline. I lost track. I was talking about Latin Americanizations, yeah? So some of the people in that in-between position, in that intermediate racial strata, might inhabit white habitus through networks, through connections, through socialization, through clubs, etc., and therefore adopt the elements of whiteness. There are plenty of books, you probably know some of them, about the dual nature of the life of many people in this status, where they, as soon as they're out of the house, they're sort of white in their behavior. What's up, man? How you doing? Hey, And then when they go back home, traditional. And then regress to a more like Indian or Buddhist tradition or what have you, So I do think that you are right, and that the inhabitants of the white habitus are not just exclusively whites. But again, we go back to who is white. Who is white? Who are the inhabitants? Who are the people in trajectory towards whiteness? There was a question in the back. Yes?
Yeah, thank you. Really brilliant talk.
Let me quote you. Brilliant.
I'm very funny.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could expand on the relationship between kind of materialism and class and structural racism. Because I think at the beginning you said it's materialist, but not in terms of class.
So let me do a confession. Before I became this thing called race color, I was a vulgar Marxist. So the first time I heard, and I remember, a black woman called Doris Pizarro, who was the secretary of political organization of the Socialist Party in Puerto Rico, and she gave a talk on race and gender matters. And this is a socialist woman. And I'm like, as Eduardo 18, little, communist guy. I'm like, why is she dividing the workers? Besides, patriarchy is not like the mode of production. Come on, you should know better. And then move forward a few years. I go to Wisconsin. I'm still a vulgar Marxist. Class. You know them, And the answer is simple, Whenever you say, well, race is a secondary contradiction used by the bourgeoisie to divide workers. What about gender? Same, secondary contradiction. Until you begin rethinking things and re-experiencing life, and you are like, that doesn't account for the complexity of the race, class, gender nexus. So I'm going to then answer your question. The race-class nexus has been connected since the development of capitalism. So let me use language. Sorry, but got to use it. If I learn Marxism, let's use it. What Marx called the process of primitive accumulation, which Marx wrongly thought is a process that started, ended. That process, I argue, has continued, particularly in Latin America. You still have areas where people are extracting. In the US too, Native American communities, they keep like using them like a garbage, yeah? Oh, we found resources, okay. Oh, we need to throw garbage, literally. Let's send them to the Navajo reservation, yeah? So that means that primitive accumulation plus what Marx called class formation was always a race class thing. It was never a pure class thing. That's why in the last particularly 5 years, but it has been 10, the term racial capitalism has become monumental as a vehicle to understand racial formation in modernity. Because the capitalist system was never just about class, but also about race. And of course, the feminists will tell us, what about gender? And you're like, okay, you want too complex. Yeah? But that's the texture of modernity. The complexity is part of the struggle. Now, the problem is, and it's a political problem. Okay, acknowledging that is important, but then how do you fight? What is your politics? How do you do a race-class politics that allows you to then advance the goalpost and move the ball forward on the race-class issues affecting the world? Not easy, because once actors are in a race-class position, the white workers of the world, 1922 South Africa, the Communist Party issued a statement, white workers of the world united. White workers of the world united. And I think that now, 100 plus years, you still have that, yeah? They may end up in some kind of solidarity during the strike, but their lives are totally segregated and different, so you can say, in the picket line, we're together. In anything else, hell no. I don't want you or your people in my neighborhood. I don't want your daughter or my son messing with your, no, nothing, yeah? So that means that we'll have to, and in the US, unfortunately, people trying this have done a poor job, like Bernie Sanders, yeah? Who then is all about class, and the race argument is nothing. In my own state, some of you hopefully know him, Reverend Barber has tried to do and I met him, he invited me to do something, and he was telling me, pushing me hard, you know. You have been too polite. In the US, I'm accustomed to people like, pa, 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 like whatever. So he pushed me and said, I think that you're wrong. I think that what we need to do is go to all these poor areas and show them that their interests are converging. The interests of the white worker and the black worker, of the poor black and the poor white are the same, so we should go there and make the case. I'm like, Reverend, I appreciate your work. And you are a large man. He physically is an imposing man. But you have your people, and you are a public figure. TV cameras are all around you. This particular black Puerto Rican ain't going to go to Alabama, Mississippi, even rural North Carolina. I'm going to keep my black Puerto Rican self in safe areas. I, in principle, agree that we need to find the language and the politics to do that, but I think it shouldn't be me. It should be progressive whites, and thankfully there are groups of progressive whites trying to do the race-class nexus. Unfortunately, if you do the numbers, so far, little. So we're beginning a process of thinking about the politics of race-class, of what people call intersectionality. And I think I tell my young students, if you want to make a big splash in sociology, move beyond just stating that race, class, and gender matters to a theorization that can be specific and tell us when is that A or B or C matters more or less, and why? Because that is not only for you to do the statistical analysis, but also for us to do the politics, yeah? If we can predict when is that gender is more important than race and class, or class more than gender and race, or race more than anything, that politically and analytically is needed. And so far what we have is theories that make the claim, like Kimberly Crenshaw or Patricia Hill Collins. By the way, empirically, the best book on this is Unequal Freedom by Evelyn Nakano Glenn, but she's a sociologist doing history. So theoretically, she didn't put a theoretical explanation, yeah? But if, as an inspiration for young folks here, hey, young folks, listen, check that book, Unequal Freedom, and see if you can extract a theory that explains when A or B or C matters more. And if you do that, send me a copy, then I will. Okay, I'm not going to steal your work. Okay, yes.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I was actually thinking about organization, the durable inequality framework of today while you were talking, and especially because I think the term organization came several times. So I was just wondering, especially in relation to the fourth mechanism that he talks about adaptation. It relates very well to the mundane practices that you're talking about. How does it relate, the durable inequality framework, to systemic racism?
I'm not using Tilly. I have personal reason for not using him. He was one of the reviewers of my first paper, and he was unkind, obtuse, and forced me to read stuff that nobody reads. I also, and you may be unfamiliar with his last book before he passed. He was drafting a book on monuments. Go and check it out. And it's an exercise in academic white supremacy. I said it. Supposedly you should not speak ill of the dead, but it is what it is. I am more inspired by the work of my own former student, Victor Ray, who wrote that article that all of you are citing, yeah? A Theory of Racialized Organization in ASR in 2019. And in that he addresses meso, macro, and micro levels of analysis and politics. So, by the way, he does cite Tilly, not me, not me. I remember. By the way, after he forced me to read stuff that nobody cares about. Like, how many of you read the work of Furnival, 1948, on plural societies? Furnival was a colonial administrator from the UK who went to India, and after observing, this ethnographic gaze, then, I'm sorry, I'm out of the, well, anyway, hey, sorry, I'm back. After observing and doing ethnography or military work for a few years, then he did okay, let me put together an argument. And that, the book he forced me to read. Then after the paper was finally accepted, took a long time, 2 years, he congratulated me and sent me a note. Hey, I'm in Sweden, doing a year in Sweden, so if you don't mind, send me a copy of the final version. Thank you for your contribution, whatever. I was working at the time at Michigan, and he was a professor at Michigan for a long, long time, directing the center where I work. So there was a sort of long, long connection between him and me. I hope that answers the question. And we can talk more, because you owe me a dinner, so. That's it? We're done?
Eduardo, can I quickly
Yes.
finish with the question?
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to quickly get to, at some point you say that we need to address organizational racism. Let's focus on universities. We heard from some of the people here that there are some initiatives which apparently seem to be welcomed. And you say that doesn't go far enough. It only scratches the surface. So what needs to be done, according to you, that's not done at the moment?
Okay, so obviously I don't have all the answers, and I do believe the social movement strategy that collectively we produce the demands. But let me tell you things I have seen, what I ended up in the festival talking about. Non-reform is reforms. I don't think the revolution is in the street waiting for fundamental change, restructuring society, yeah? Because university is not isolated from society. We reflect society and social patterns of domination, yeah? So that, because I don't think the revolution in the streets, we need to find what Nikos Poulantzas called non-reformist reforms. Let me give you one that I saw that worked so well for 2 years. And the 2-year stuff will come clear. So I was a professor at Texas A&M University, and a new dean came. And you know, deans in the US context, they direct colleges. Is that the same system here? A college is the College of Natural Social Science.
No, that's just head of school.
Okay, schools, okay. So he is the dean of a school. And he said, from now on, the salary raises will be determined by 3 factors. Quality of research, a third. Another third comes from internationalization of your work as a department and as a scholar. In Texas, it meant you better do something with Mexico. And the last one, diversity. So you may get 1/3 of the pocket money for research, quality research, 1/3 for internalization, and 0 for diversity. And that meant that departments like economics, chemistry, biology were getting 0 for diversity. And that money was then given to other departments like sociology. So again, for 2 years, that was a non-reformist reform until the power of the university came down. And the economist said, we bring more grant money than all these sociologists, and you're giving money to them. If you don't change this dean, our stars are going to begin leaving and taking their grant money. Young folks, you don't know, all these grant people, the university love them because in the US context, I'm assuming it's the same here, the university keeps 50% plus of the money. So whenever you see an announcement of Cambridge professor gets 20 million, the university is like, we get half that money or more. At Duke, it's like 60%. Yes. So after 2 years, the non-reformist reform ended because the structure of the beast in universities is, I don't know if it's the same here, the people who really rule the university are not administrators. It's the board of trustees. You have a board of trustees? You don't have that. So in the US context, the board of trustees makes decisions. They even technically make decisions on promotions. So if there is an Eduardo that they want to nix, when the promotion goes up, they say, okay, we don't care. Usually they rubber stamp. But if they want to make a case, they are like, Eduardo, no soup for you. We're not going to get promoted. So for us students, and that will be the reimagination, what kind of structural changes can we produce? What kind of non-reformist reforms we produce to ultimately push the system forward? So I'm happy to say that what we cannot do is being happy and content with the happy diversity talk, yeah? In between that and the ultimate policies that will change the structure, we have space to think, process, manufacture ideas and things. Maybe you all have ideas and should begin then, sending them to me. Let's share ideas, I know in the US, some people have been talking about using the endowment. You guys have an endowment too, no? Okay. The endowment of Harvard Princeton is almost unethical, yeah, the amount of money. And they treat that money like investments, yeah? They don't want to touch it, yeah? So some people are saying, if we want to undo some of the damage done by race stratification within the university, why don't we take a pocket of that endowment and target it for restructuring racial affairs, fellowships, if we need to replace buildings and create new spaces, remove some statues, let's take some of that money and target it. So far, only one university has accepted. Everybody else is like, they don't want to touch it because it's their money. And they operate like bankers, yeah? They want more. Okay.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. And we've got to go. There are people waiting for the next lecture.
Yeah.
And thank you so much.